Welcome in, everyone, to a new episode of the Batfoot Podcast. My name is Damien, here with my co-hosts Matt and David. We got a jam-packed episode today. Carlos Correa finally made his decision. We have the Tigers announce some field dimension changes. Robo Umps are coming to the minor leagues, and a lot more. But before we get to all of that, Matt, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty good. Had a good couple of weeks here, and just hanging out. I guess we did an episode after the new year, so just kind of the more boring part of the off season. Although Correa did technically happen in the last 2 weeks, that was a saga to say the least. But not a ton of baseball news going around. But we've been able to pack this episode full of stuff. So excited to bring it to you. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing good. It's been a bit of a busy 2 weeks, doing a lot of work and trying to get some other things settled. And but it is wintertime. It is baseball's not on the mind at this point, but I'm starting to feel the itch and getting ready for spring training. And I think it's right around a month until pitchers and catchers report to Arizona. So starting to get to where I'm thinking about baseball, thinking about spring training. How you doing this week, Damien?
I'm doing pretty good myself. Like you said, staying busy. Just watched a really good Chili Bowl this past weekend, which I always enjoy watching that. It's a pretty nice race. But like you said, it's baseball season's quickly approaching. We're starting to see the fan fests or whatever you want to call them. I know the Cubs had theirs this last week. The Dodgers one's here in a couple weeks. I'll actually be going to that. So it's quickly approaching, and we're getting to pitchers and catchers. So the last minute moves of the offseason are coming upon us. But let's go ahead and start with the big saga we had, and that was the Carlos Correa. The Twins met Carlos Correa's giant asking price finally. So David and Matt, Carlos Correa signs with the Twins for 6 years, $200 million. There is a vesting option in there for multiple different years. That is for 4 years, $70 million. Overall, the deal, I believe, can be 10 years for $270.
Yeah, I can start with it. We've talked a lot about Carlos Correa. Obviously, the Mets had the same issue that the Giants had. They just made it a lot more of a saga and a public disaster because their owner was talking about it, and they were going on to it for like 3 weeks, whereas the Giants kind of found the issue and immediately kind of cut ties. But Carlos Correa decided, hey, I don't want to take all these concessions in my contract that the Mets are offering. So I'll go back to the Twins, which honestly, I always felt like the Twins were a little bit more in this than people realized. I think Carlos Correa actually enjoyed his time in Minnesota. And I always find him as kind of a guy who it feels like it would benefit him to be like the face of a franchise rather than be another guy in a franchise. I think that, and I think he's definitely going to be the face of the Twins, when it comes to the fact that when it comes to the fact that that Buxton's always hurt. I mean, the fact that Buxton's always seemed to be injured, like he would probably be the face of the Twins if it wasn't, even with Correa there, if he stayed healthy for a full season because he's so good. But Correa is good as well. The deal he signed, 6 years, $200 million. It has a vesting option, 4 years for $70 million. So it could be a 10-year, $270 million deal. They did meet kind of what the Mets, they did meet the asking price. So it's definitely interesting to see what happens here. And I mean, this team's kind of interesting now to me. I mean, we were talking about it before the show is, they still have a lot of question marks, but if they can somehow find a way to finally stay healthy for a year, like they were pretty good last year before the injuries really caught up with them, like Buxton going down. They had, some pitching injuries like Maeda, Malley, and Tony Gray missed a lot of time last year. But they have some interesting players here. And I think this team could be, they're definitely kind of that division, that the AL Central is interesting. That the top three are kind of really close. I think this could end up being a postseason team this year.
So I don't know if we actually managed to get in the chronological timeline of Correa, because this actually started during the season last year. I want to say it was in the last week. Damian might know the exact game, but Carlos Correa slid into a base and felt the metal plate that's been in his leg since before he made the major leagues. He felt it jar, and that led to him getting it checked out this offseason. And, he played through it. He finished the season. He actually didn't go on the IL, and we didn't really see his performance get impacted, but he noticed it. And so that led to doctor visits and led to that being the key that the Giants, who originally agreed to a 13-year, I think it was $350 million deal with Correa, that deal got nixed because the Giants requested a doctor that knew about the leg and the plate having been jarred in a game last year. So the doctor basically recommended that the Giants not do this deal because that he felt like Correa's leg would get worse and impact his mobility. But Correa's been playing since 2015, since this leg injury, and has never gone on the IL for said leg. So I just, I question the doctor here. Like, it's very clear that we have the evidence that Correa has been good. But I can see where, you're spending $350 million. You want to, hit all angles there. I'm surprised that they couldn't work it out, but I think Correa felt very slighted by the Giants announcing the press conference and then only then, using this as kind of a way to weasel out of the deal. And then the Mets consulted the same doctor, said Scott Boras. They went right to the same doctor. The Mets signed Correa for a 12-year, $315 million deal. And again, same doctor. So the Twins benefit from, I think, the Mets and Giants mistakes here. I think this is a bad mistake by both teams. Correa's a really good player. This is actually him, I think, on a cheaper deal with Minnesota, but it works out really nicely for Minnesota, and they're going to really enjoy having Correa for multiple years because Matt's right. He seemed to enjoy his time there. It's going to be a nice little saga with him, Byron Buxton, and the rest of that team, which is definitely a contender in the AL Central.
Yeah, I don't know the exact game that you're talking about, but I do remember reading that throughout this whole saga that we've been dealing with there. With going back to when the deal happened with the Giants, and then they were going to it was the day of the press conference. Correa was literally already dressed, and the Giants kind of pretty much brought out like, oh, hey, now we're worried about it. Literally the day of the press conference, like hours beforehand, and wanted to not even put like things about the ankle. They just wanted to like take the deal to a lower level. And then Boris got with Steve Cohen directly, got the deal worked out. What was it, like a week later or something?
It's like a day later.
It was like 3 a.m. after the presser got canceled. It was 3 a.m. after the presser got canceled.
That's right. Because Cohen had tried to jump in. Steve Cohen for the Mets had tried to jump in before the Giants signed him late in the process. Boris had told him they were too far down the road with the Giants already. So then the Mets do it. Then it was a while until they figured it out. And then we're like, oh, well, they might potentially have issues as well. Then it comes out that they do have issues. They use the same doctor. And then I read somewhere that the offer from the Mets had went from like the $315 million or something to like $150 something million with the opportunity to get all the money back or close to the same amount of money back if he had so many different games or whatever. But they pretty much took it like $200 and something million away from their initial offer or something. Now the Twins slow played this entire process. When this offseason started, they offered Correa 10 years, $285 million.
Yeah.
That was what was reported out there. Boris brought 4 of his own doctors. The Mets obviously the Twins obviously felt comfortable with it to begin with, and they ended up getting him on a deal that would technically be $15 million cheaper than the deal they started with in his initial offer through this offseason. So, I don't know how much of an issue, David, you mentioned he's never dealt with a major problem with this ankle since he's been in the major leagues. I don't know why it would be such a hard part to put something about the ankle if he dealt with that injury again, or if he had to have a surgery because of that injury again, why you would worry about that. But if he hasn't shown any issues with it, I would think more people would be worried about the back of Correa with what he's dealt with actually in the major league so far.
Right.
More rather than the ankle. So it's very questionable, but at the end of the day, the Twins got Carlos Correa, and we'll be looking back on this deal in 10 years and saying, where are we now and what success did these three teams have?
Yeah, and I was just real quick. I guess y'all's point on the whole like the doctors and the teams screwed up, but if there is a question about Correa and how, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how the ankle would work and whatever issues that might cause long term. But if there's a question about it, like you're about to put, especially for the Giants, because the Mets have so much dang money, like it doesn't really, they could sign a $28 million contract and it wouldn't even hurt them long term. But if the Giants do, like that could hurt their plans long term because, their ownership's not Steve Cohen. So, like, it's one of those things where if this is the guy you're going to sign for that 13-year deal, like in 10 years, if like he might not even be able to play if his ankles, the doctor might be saying, hey, he's only gonna be able to play like 3 or 4 more years, and like that ankle's just not gonna, his mobility's gonna go away. He's gonna have to basically be a DH, because we have seen that before. Not the same injury, but like Albert Pujols, look at him. I mean, after he had that, the Achilles injury, like he just couldn't really move anymore. And it's cost him in his base running. It cost him in he became like one of the worst players to ever. He became one of the worst batting average on balls in play guys ever, because anything that was hit on the infield, he would never beat out. I mean, and it affected him. Like that's been a thing that's happened before. So, I mean, I get the teams, if you're going to sign somebody to that mega deal, that's one of the largest contracts in baseball history, not the largest, but one of the largest, like, I get having some hesitancy if there's doctors out there that you trust saying this guy you cannot sign this guy to this deal because he's not going to hold up. So I get the restraint there, especially from the Giants' perspective.
I look at this as, how the Rangers just signed Jacob deGrom, who just came off of a major arm injury, to a massive deal for 5 years, which is a pretty hefty commitment. I mean, Correa only has the 6 guaranteed years. Where with no complications, no issues, but Jacob deGrom has a much more extensive injury history than Carlos Correa, and with, major elbow reconstruction multiple times. Like it's the kind of thing that I'm just like, Correa's been very vocal about wanting to get paid well. I wonder if that wasn't part of this, where they kind of felt like they could take advantage of this and try to reduce the cost, where they felt like maybe, even the Twins you saw got a cheaper deal here. So I don't know. That's my thought here.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, like I said, obviously the Giants didn't want him bad enough to where, I mean, if they signed him to start with, like they actually signed him. I mean, so if they had been floating this out there saying he's not healthy, whatever, we'll sign him, but at a discount. Like, I get that, but I mean, they had agreed to a deal, and they knew that when they backed off of that deal, like even if they had tried to, slow play him or try to decrease that deal, like they initially agreed to the deal. So, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily like that they were not gonna. I think they definitely had a problem with the physical. I mean, I definitely think that was an issue, and whether it was as serious as it's been led on to believe. I mean, sometimes teams balk at stuff like that when they shouldn't. I mean, I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, and the Dolphins balked at Drew Brees because they said his shoulder might be messed up, and he ended up being like a Hall of Fame quarterback and winning Super Bowls with the Saints. So, I mean, I've been on the wrong end. My teams have been on the wrong end of this before. I mean, it's just it's hard to say sometimes. I mean, but it makes the signing a lot riskier if you do think there's a medical issue. And I mean, if you're putting in that kind of money, like it is something that I get. And I do think the Mets actually offered something somewhat similar to what the Twins did, but I think Correa was like pretty unhappy with the Mets at that point. So he was like, I'm just going to go back. And I think he honestly might have been preferring Minnesota all along if they would buck up a deal that he would take there. Like, honestly, I think he liked it there. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe so, but maybe not. But I definitely think it's going to work out well for the Twins if he stays healthy, because he's a good player.
Yeah, I think the real issue, and this will be the last point of that I have at least. I think the real issue with Correa's having is that they've supposedly talked to 5 doctors, and there was this one doctor that said they didn't like it, and that's the doctor that 2 of the teams used, even though they have already talked to 4 other doctors who said that was fine.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. I think that's what his problem with the Mets was, is that, hey, like, you used the same exact doctor as the Giants. Like, what did you expect here?
Yeah.
But anyways, the Twins did make another move, though. Like, I know we've been spending a lot of time on this Correa deal, but they also did sign starting pitcher Chris Paddock to a 3-year, $12.5 million extension. Paddock was acquired, I believe, last offseason or early in the year, this last year. Wasn't that great for the Twins, but ended up undergoing Tommy John surgery. We'll probably miss most of the season this year, but they do get him for 2 more years. I know he was in with arbitration, but it locks up some of his numbers. Exactly.
Yeah. When was he a free agent supposed to be before this deal? Was he a 2025 free agent?
I believe so.
Okay. So they might have bought out. I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on it, but they might have bought out a year of free agency with this deal, which makes it a really good thing to do. It's a fairly low risk, 3 years. I mean, obviously, if you're going to keep him around, like you're avoiding ARB, you're going to keep that number, at $4.2 million, which isn't too bad for a pitcher that, can be pretty good. This year in Minnesota, his ERA at a 4.03 wasn't great, but in his first 22 innings, he had really good peripherals. He looked pretty good. So this is a guy who has some talent. So maybe he'll figure things out. And he's young, and coming off of Tommy John, we'll see. But that's a pretty low, a low dollar figure for a guy who has the talent to, when he comes back, maybe take off a little bit. So
he did buy out a free agent year, by the way.
So that's nice to get. So if he comes back and he does really well, you're kind of giving him that security of, hey, if this Tommy John, if it doesn't work out, we're going to pay you a little bit, but we'll keep you on, but give us back 1 extra year. So I think I like that deal for both sides. It's kind of interesting little contract.
It wasn't long ago that he was having a Rookie of the Year level campaign in 2019 with a really, really stellar season. So, and kind of looking like a future ace at that point. And he's had some struggles since then, but this is a guy who may very well be very impactful to the Carlos Correa led Twins in the future.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting to see what that division looks like here in the next few years. But the staying in that division, the Detroit Tigers made a big move, and then they or not a big move, but they made a move, and then they also announced some big changes. That's what I was trying to say. They traded their lone All-Star representative Gregory Soto to the Phillies. The Phillies acquired Gregory Soto and Cody Clemens for infielder Nick Maton, outfielder Matt Vierling, and catcher Donnie Sands.
Yeah, so this is Gregory Soto is very wild, and was getting some results kind of in spite of his control the last couple of seasons. And he plays a very risky relief game where he gets a runner on base, but he is able to get some ground balls and in the right spots, get some guys left on base. But he's also pitching in Colorado, Detroit, which, as we'll get to in a second, may not be as big of a pitcher's park anymore, but he was getting fly balls in spots that I think would have given up multiple runs. So I feel like he was getting pretty fortunate. The Phillies have tried to rework their bullpen, but I think at the end of the day, it's still just going to be Sir Anthony Dominguez and Jose Alvarado. Craig Kimbrell and Gregory Soto are probably not the most trustworthy of options there, and they didn't really give anything up for him, so this is a perfectly fine option for the Phillies. I think Soto's a little more reputation-based than he was good in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. I think Gregory Soto is a guy who he's a lefty that throws unbelievably hard, but he has absolutely zero clue where it's going. And his strikeout rates really aren't very good for a guy that throws that hard. I know in 2020, which was a short season, it was over 11, but 2021, a 10.74 strikeout rate is good. But when you're walking over 5 guys per 9 innings, like, it's not that good. And then this year, he struck out less than a batter per inning this year, and still had a ton of walks. So the one number to look at for this year, his home run per fly ball rate was 3.4%, which is pretty much Comerica. Like, I mean, that number's Comerica. Like, you're typically going to run more than that on fly balls, and a little bit of luck too, even for Comerica. So, he'll be an okay piece. I mean, he does have that electric arm, throwing almost 99 on average this year. So maybe they figure something out with him in Philly. I kind of doubt it, given their track record on figuring out relievers. But who knows? Cody Clemens is kind of a quadruple A bench bat type guy. Roger Clemens' son, interesting enough. And then the Tigers, they got some depth. Young, depth, controllable, you know, position players. I mean, Nick Maton and Matt Vierling, neither one of them are all that great, but they'll play utility roles. Matt Vierling can probably platoon somewhere in the outfield. He's got some big league experience. The Tigers need some guys like this because, I mean, these options are probably every bit as good as running out some of the guys they ran out last year. I mean,
Right.
like they have a tiny bit of upside just because they're really young too, and so we'll see what happens there. I don't think this is a very consequential trade or anything, but it's it's something. So
yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how Gregory Soto adapts to Citizens Bank Ballpark.
Yeah,
that's going to be an interesting one. But right there, you were mentioning Comerica Park, and it's been a running joke. I mean, ever since it was built, that is one of the most pitcher-friendly ballparks there is in the game. And the Tigers announced that they are going to make some tweaks to that field for the 2023 season. Center field, they're going to move in 10 feet from 422 to 412. Still is the second deepest part or center field part of a ballpark in the major leagues behind Coors. But the wall heights, they're bringing them to 7 foot all around. Center field was 8.5 feet. Right center field was 13 feet, and then right field was 8.5 foot. So you're talking about a 1.5 foot drop in most places, and a 4 foot drop or even more than 4 foot drop in right center field. Which, not sure that's going to make much of a difference because not many times you see a ball hit off the wall out there. But keeps the gaps in play for extra base hits, but allows more homers and more, I guess, home run robberies, exciting plays, they say, in their thing. But also another big thing, which I'm going to be really interested to see how this, what it brings, is that they're building the wall with new materials and padding that's supposed to enhance player safety. So I don't know if that means, they're using a different type of rod, or if they're going to more of a, foam-based system. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see because we've seen a lot of outfield collisions into walls the past couple years that players going full speed, hurt some players pretty seriously.
Yeah. Moving the center field wall in. I mean, it's still so deep, 412 feet. I mean, it's still going to be a pitcher friendly dimension there. The wall height being brought down, it might help a little bit with that. I do think it's kind of cool. It'll help, allow for maybe a little bit of home run robbery and stuff. Although, like, as we've seen in some places, like in LA in the corners where the wall's really short and stuff, like, it's not quite as impressive to rob a home run if you don't even have to jump. So I kind of hate that part of it. Like, it's a lot more impressive to me. It's a lot more fun to watch when a guy, makes the rare, like, climb the wall and somehow reach up and make the play type thing. But that'll be fine, and that'll help maybe a couple home runs here and there. And then I think the new wall construction, that's really interesting. I like that. Anytime you can do something that's doesn't like change the integrity of the game while helping player safety, I think that's fantastic. So I like that a lot.
The Detroit Tigers last year were dead last in offense in the major leagues. They had 4 players cross 10 home runs, 0 players cross 20 home runs. And I know the ball got de-juiced a bit last year, but that's very, very problematic when your home field is an active detriment to your players. We saw kind of a historically, whiff happy season from Javi Baez. Jonathan Scope was bad, and Scope's usually a guy who relies on his power rather, and he couldn't get the ball out of the ballpark. I mean, Jimmer Candelario did horribly and got DFA'd. Spencer Torkelson came up and was bad. Riley Green didn't hit that many homers, and his power numbers were low. So I think this is really beneficial, especially for Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson, as they try to kind of lead this Tigers team into the future. And then maybe Javi Baez will get a few more home runs as well to center field. He likes going out there.
Yeah, I do think a lot of it had to do with a lot of those guys with their offensive issues had to do with the fact that they're on the Tigers and the Tigers are horrible at player development and scouting and stuff, and the fact that they're just, I mean, they're whiffing so much. So, I mean, you can't hit a home run if you can't touch the ball. So,
They're
I mean,
definitely.
but it
I
is going to help
wonder
them.
if part of that, and this is pure speculation. I wonder if part of it is they know they have to swing harder to get it out of that park. They're busy trying to hit home runs, and they're busy trying to create offense that way. And
I will say, I don't know
know.
about Torkelson and Riley Green, but I do know that Javi Baez was not swinging harder last year than he ever has. Like
he swings normal. That's a normal.
He swung normal last year. So
Yeah, that's something. But let's go ahead and jump over to the National League Central, and we'll start with the Milwaukee Brewers. They signed Wade Miley to a 1-year, $4.5 million deal, and then they also acquired Bryce Wilson from the Pirates for cash.
Well, this works out nicely for Matt and I. Each one has seen the other play. I'll talk about Wade Miley briefly. He was on the Cubs last year, and he pitched really well. He pitched the game Damian and I went to together. And was pretty good before getting relieved by Hayden Wesneski, who was really good. So I think Wade Miley's time with the Cubs was very injury prone, and this deal kind of represents that, where you don't know what you're getting with Wade Miley. When he does pitch, he's really reliable. He's going to throw strikes. He's going to kick ground balls. But when he's hurt, he's kind of, you can't really rely on him to stay healthy. So the Brewers are going to hope that he can give them as much as he can. And for $4.5 million, you'll take as much as you can get.
yeah, I second on Wade Miley. Of course, I didn't watch him as much last year as you do, but this is the Brewers team that really just needs depth in their pitching rotation. They've got they've got an elite guy, and then they've got a close to elite guy, and then they've got a guy who's really, really good when healthy in Peralta. And then they really just need to fill out this rotation with a couple of good pitchers who are experienced, and they just they're not going to ruin your day. And Wade Miley's definitely one of those guys. I mean, he's a pretty consistent, like, back into the rotation arm, and I think it's fantastic for what they need. Bryce Wilson is a guy who I've been watching a long time. He's a former Brave, came up with the Braves. They traded him to the Pirates a couple years ago for Rodriguez, the closer, Richard Rodriguez. He was so bad I already forgot his name. But yeah, and then Bryce Wilson's a guy who, when he was coming up, was a pretty good. He was a pretty decent prospect. He was not a super high draft pick, but his fastball was really, really good, and it's not as good as it was. His stuff has taken a dip. He never really has caught on at the big league level, outside of one really, really elite start he made in the playoffs against the Dodgers. Like, he has been pretty much awful his entire big league career. So I hate to say it, I like Bryce Wilson a lot. I think he's a bulldog on the mound. He's a lot of fun to watch, but he's just not all that great. And I mean, you look at his baseball savant page, and it's, with the exception of the fact that he doesn't walk a ton of guys, his baseball savant page is like entirely blue, and his fastball just gets absolutely crushed. He really didn't have that much off-speed stuff either. So this is a guy who is purely he's got a pretty good body for a pitcher. Size-wise, he looks to be pretty durable, and maybe you can unlock something about him. But this is also a guy who's dropped 2 miles per hour off his fastball velocity since his debut, which was in 2018. So it's not like he's some 20-year veteran that's lost a little bit of velocity. Like, his stuff is just taken a nosedive since he got to the big leagues. And I hate to see it for him, but he'll get a shot with the Brewers. I doubt he was in their big league rotation though at the end of the day.
Yeah, he just probably adds to that depth, like what you were just mentioning there for the for the Brewers. But they acquired him from the Pirates, and then the Pirates made another move that I think is probably the feel-good move of the offseason, and that's signing Andrew McCutchen to a 1-year, $5 million deal, reuniting McCutchen with Pittsburgh, where he spent his first 9 years of his career, was a former MVP there, and that run from 2012 through 2015, where his lowest MVP finish was 5th. Andrew McCutchen is a hero in Pittsburgh, and he's returning there late in his career, which could potentially be his swan song.
Yeah, I agree. This is a guy who it's kind of like the Zach Greinke signing of the Royals last year. Like, this is a guy who he needed to go back to Pittsburgh for one more year, and 36 years old. He really hasn't been a very productive big leaguer for a while now. He did have an above average seasons at the plate in, his 3 years in Philly from 2019 to 2021, but they were barely above average, and he cannot play the field anymore. He's strictly a DH now. Hit the projection systems don't hate him this year. Think he could put up another above average offensive season, and the Pirates really just need a couple guys who can hit and a veteran presence. And I think Andrew McCutchen is perfect for them. He's going to bring in some fans to their stadium that want to see him play there again. He's part of kind of back to their glory days a little bit with him, and he'll add a veteran presence for some of the young guys that are coming up for them. And, he'll provide a little bit of offense for them too. So I love the signing for them, and it's not, super expensive. Of course, the Pirates weren't going to sign a super expensive guy. So
You already know what I'm going to ask. What do we think? Is Kutch gonna sneak into the Hall of Fame here? 50 wins above replacement, or really 51, and he may have one or two more seasons. Could potentially get back to that 2021 form one more time, maybe. But he's certainly got the pedigree and the prime. I just don't know if he has the longevity, but his longevity is better than like Evan Longoria's. So
I think what's going to come down to is that his longevity has been mediocre, while like that run he had there for those 4 or 5 years was really, really good, but he didn't have that sustained run for a long time. If he had a couple more seasons where, like that 2015 season, where he hit 292 with 23 homers, got on base a lot, still was playing solid defense, then okay. But like ever since 2016, like his best batting average is 279, and even that was high. Like after that, it's really about 250.
He's had one season where, if you can kind of consider a guy who's a legit, like a solid everyday player, about a 2 wins above replacement guy, he's had one season above that since 2015. I mean, he really just fell off a cliff after 2015. I know 2017 wasn't bad, his last year with the Pirates, but you talk about the Hall of Fame debate, you kind of compare him to Evan Longoria. I think the big difference is that I think Evan Longoria has a better chance of putting up, 4 or 5 more WAR in his career, because he's still a somewhat productive player. And he can still play the field a little bit too. So, he can put up 2 or 3 more seasons of a 2 WAR and get close to that 60 range. Whereas Andrew McCutchen, I'll be shocked if he gets above, if he puts up any more WAR. I mean, I know some of the projection systems are thinking he could put up 1 to 2 WAR this year, but that's going to be tough. And, 50's kind of on the lower side, especially for outfielders. So definitely interesting. If Andrew Jones is struggling as much as he is to get into the Hall of Fame with like 70 WAR, and being like the greatest center field defender of all time, or at least in that conversation, like Andrew McCutchen's going to really struggle with 51 WAR.
Oh yeah, and that's actually where I was going with this. And to be fair, remember Jim Edmonds got 5% off of the ballot with more WAR than this, but Jim Edmonds and Andrew Jones also, neither of them got an MVP award, and Kutch get 2 or just got 1. I think he just got the 1.
He got 1.
But that is a feather in his cap. He's got some playoff heroics there in a couple of those seasons. It's just with Kutch, it's all reputation based, and he's such a good guy, and a good dude for baseball. Very famous and well liked by everybody. I do wonder if his reputation precedes him a little bit, but that is an interesting question moving forward. And I think he'll be viewed a lot like Bobby Abreu has, where he'll never get off the ballot, but I don't think he'll ever get more than 50% of the vote. It's just tough because there's going to be so many good outfielders pretty consistently moving forward here. I mean, you're looking at, like we said, Andrew Jones he's not getting in the Hall of Fame right now, even though he's got the numbers for it rather easily. So, I think baseball writers are sticklery.
But I think Andrew Jones is going to get in, not this year, but he's going to get in before the ballot's up. He's almost the 70% this year, they're saying. So,
hopefully he certainly deserves it. So.
Yeah,
certainly. But We'll jump over to the Chicago Cubs, staying in that NL Central. And David, they made another couple moves, which I know one you're not too happy about, but they did sign Eric Hosmer to a 1-year, basically veteran minimum deal, $720,000. And then they signed Trey Mancini to a 2-year, $14 million deal. It basically is a 1-year, $7 million with a player option for a 1-year, $7 million.
Yeah, the option vests if Trey Mancini gets 350 plate appearances. So the opt-out vests. So he can opt out if he gets 350 plate appearances this year, which I certainly hope he does. Trey Mancini's really good coming off of having cancer through year 2020. But that was directly after he had a 35 homer season and a 132 WRC plus. Since then, he's been a just about league average hitter, maybe just a little bit better. Last year, he was at 116 entering September and then went like 3 for 45 or something and cratered his season numbers back to league average. But I really like Trey Mancini. He was the right guy for this, this DH kind of handing it off to Matt Mervis role that the Cubs were looking for. But, Eric Hosmer got DFA'd between the Cubs signing Dansby Swanson and the Cubs getting into the negotiation with Trey Mancini. And I think they tried to jump on that. Hosmer is, a former World Series champion. He's a guy who signed a mega deal and is, he wasn't performing up to the mega deal's the hype. Hosmer did have a really good 2020 where he was elevating the ball. He was slugging a lot. And for a guy who pulls the ball as hard as Eric Hosmer does on the ground, the removal of the shift could very well, help his overall numbers. Now, I don't expect Eric Hosmer to go back to being, 2017 Eric Hosmer, but he's definitely going to be a veteran presence in the lineup, a good at bat, a guy who can kind of solidify that first base position. And he and Trey Mancini, righty, lefty. I mean, it's just smart baseball. It's smart roster building here. They're gonna throw those guys out there at DH, and if one of them gets hurt or one of them isn't performing, they'll bring up Matt Mervis and they'll give him a shot. And Hosmer costs literally nothing. They'll just cut him. So I like those moves. There's nothing but upside, but I like Mancini a pretty good deal more. I think there's more there. But obviously with the rule changes, Eric Hosmer could very well, have a little bit of a resurgence with the pressure off and a new team and a new uniform.
Yeah. And, I'd pretty much feel the same way about those as David does. I think Hosmer might have a little bit more in the tank than people realize. There's some things to still like about him, even though, right now he's not that great of a player. As a league minimum bench guy and maybe a platoon guy, he's fine. He has put up even with not lifting the ball, he's been an above league average hitter like the last 3 years. So
right, that's what's wild.
It's not that he's completely horrible, and he's a good on base guy too. Putting up 340 on base percentages most of the time. So it doesn't strike out a ton. Good contact hitter. And then, Trey Mancini's kind of the opposite of that. He's kind of more of a slugging. He does walk a pretty good bit, but he's more of a guy who needs to slug. So definitely interesting. Trey Mancini did cost a little bit more. So, the $7 million a year, if he ends up being awful and he's still stuck with that next year, like the, $7 million a year, you're kind of stuck with that money. Like that still could be a kind of a, that's some form of real money, but not too bad. But I do think Trey Mancini's fine. I think they're real similar in the production they're going to give you, just in different ways. Neither one can play defense, and Mancini's going to slug a little bit more, strike out a little bit more, walk a little bit more, maybe. But he's going to put up a slightly above league average season, just like Eric Hosmer is. He's just going to hit the ball on the ground and contact hit a lot more, not slug quite as much, maybe not walk quite as much, but it'll be real similar. So,
yeah, I don't have an issue with either one of these deals. I was more on the Hosmer side when this was all happening. I know David and a lot of other people were like, it's not, we don't like it to begin with, but I looked at a guy who, if you're paying the league minimum, if you're getting a guy who's able to hit 260 and get on base, 33% of the time and give you about a league average to slightly above league average offensive production, who cares if he doesn't slug 20 homers? Like, that's not a bad guy to have around. He's still walking a decent bit. He still doesn't strike out a ton. This last year, 15.3% strikeout rate. Like, you take that all the time from a bench guy. Like, and he's a good clubhouse presence. I mean, you've never heard a bad thing about
Won
Eric
World
Hosmer.
Series.
Yeah, he's a guy you want around your team, especially if you're going to have a young guy like Matt Mervis coming up. You're going to have a young team who's trying to work its way back into contention for a wild card spot. Like, Eric Hosmer's a good guy to have around, and especially if it's for a league minimum deal, it's perfect.
Yeah, and one more thing.
Preaching in the choir.
Yeah, and I was going to say one more thing with him. His floor is pretty much what you've seen from him in the last couple of years. Like, I don't think he's going to come in and just be like a 20 WRC plus, strikes out every time he gets up there. Like, sometimes there's a chance that you end up with one of those guys, and I just think he's going to be his upside's not quite as high, but he's got some form of upside, and maybe they can figure something out with his swing. But like, I think his floor is about what he's been the last couple of years. It's not like he's 40 years old either. So
I think his performance has been overblown in San Diego due to the contract, because the contract's not his fault. But when you sign such a big deal, when everybody knew it was a bad idea in the first place to sign a guy who's got a high line drive rate, low, very reliant on batting average, doesn't slug as much. To sign that guy to a really long-term deal at first base, that was always a bad move. And he really hasn't been that bad. Like, it's just, we know that if you're spending that much of your payroll on one guy, you really want that guy to perform. Obviously, he's not doing that for San Diego. The Cubs, he can do nothing for all the Cubs care. They just want this guy in the clubhouse, see what happens. And, he hasn't ever hit below 253 since the 2017 contract. Like, he's never been a disaster. Like you said, he's just not been that impactful player that he was in 2017. So, I'm down for this. I don't love Hosmer, but again, for literally, the veteran minimum, it's fine. It's only upside.
Absolutely. Well, let's move over to the American League East, and the Red Sox finally didn't let one of their star players away from them. They traded Mookie Betts a couple years ago. They let Xander Bogaerts walk this year. There was a lot of rumors that Rafael Devers was going to get traded or going to walk in free agency after this season. Well, they signed the extension, a 11-year, $331 million extension. Massive deal for Chaim Bloom, who's caught a lot of flack this year and locks up Boston's third base role for quite a few years.
Yeah, I mean, this guy, Rafael Devers, is a really good hitter. Put up, 141 WRC plus this year, with the exception of shortened season 2020 when it was just a 108. In 2019, 2021, and 2022, he's been above 130 WRC plus every year. He's a mixed bag of a defender at third base. There's been a couple years, like 2019, he was really good at third base. This year, he was average. 2021, he was horrible. So I guess kind of going forward, we don't really know what he's going to be there, although I think most people kind of expect him to be like slightly below league average at third as a hitter. I mean, as a fielder. But this guy, he's a really good player, and they locked him up for a long time. This is something the Red Sox have refused to do in recent years, is lock guys up for a long time. Obviously, you've got, obviously you've had,
Mookie, Bogaerts.
So many Bogaerts, Mookie, among others have left. I mean, it's been, they've been notorious for not re-signing players. And their Devers is going to be the face of their franchise for a long time. So we'll see if he's able to keep up his approach. He doesn't walk a ton. His strikeout rates are good. We'll see how he ages. As somebody who's already kind of a, league average-ish third baseman, defensively, like, we'll see how that ages. I can see a scenario where this contract ends up not being great if he ends up putting up, DH only stats, which, I mean, if he's able to put up a 141 WRC plus every year, the DH stats is fine, even on that contract. But, if it's something like a 120 and he's a DH, he's getting paid like $30 million a year, that's a little bit, much for that. But it shouldn't be too bad. He's a great player, and, good for the Red Sox for finally re-signing somebody.
I love his Baseball Savant page because it's like average exit velocity, 98th percentile, right?
Yeah.
Average hard hit percent, 96%. Then it's like outs above average, 24th percent. Sprint speed, 13%. Like, this is very much a slugger. The fact that he can play third base to any extent is a bonus at this point. I think he'll eventually just be a first baseman, and that'll be fine. He's certainly athletic enough to play in the field, so he's not just DH, I don't think. But as long as he can play some third base over the course of this contract and then swap over to first base DH, it'll be a successful contract. This is a guy I trust to be a MVP level masher for years to come. You don't put up 330 homer seasons, this year 27, but 141 games and a de-juiced ball, that he's still top of the league in power, top of the league in extra base hits. He's a clutch hitter. He gets a bunch of RBI. He's a, good approach at the plate, doesn't strike out a ton, even though he does have some whiff issues per Baseball Savant. But this is a guy I trust completely. Would have been happy to see him hit free agency, but Boston does the right thing here in locking him up.
And he's had the ability to step up in big moments for Boston too. We've seen him deliver in the playoffs multiple times. So good for Boston for finally locking their guy up, and giving some sort of stability there for the long term. But let's stay in the American League East, and we had the Toronto Blue Jays signing Brandon Belt to a 1-year, $9.3 million deal. The former longtime San Francisco Giants taking his talents to Toronto.
Yeah, and Toronto's been looking for left-handed hitters to round out their lineup. They've gone after Kevin Kiermaier. They went after Dalton Varsho, and now Brandon Belt as well. And let's not forget that Brandon Belt is 1 year removed from a 157 WRC plus. That was pretty juice ball related, I think, but he changed up his swing and launch angle and popped a bunch of home runs. And then last year wasn't able to get to those. But this is a guy who walks at a 10+% walk rate for his whole career. So his approach is going to be welcome in that Blue Jays lineup featuring like Bo Bichette, where his walk rate's maybe not as good. I think Varsho is also not super great in terms of walk rate. So Belt can get in there and provide that patient at bat with a lot of foul balls and a lot of contact. I don't know how much that power will come back that he showed in 2021. Depends on what MLB does with the balls, but the shift being removed should help Brandon Belt a lot. He's the kind of guy who would ground it to the right side. So, I like this move for the Blue Jays. He'll obviously, come off the bench, but it's a pretty cheap deal, and the Blue Jays are just looking for quality players to put into their roster. So here's another one right here. Brandon Belt's been solid for years.
Yeah, I agree. Brandon Belt's a really good player. He's been a solid role player for the Giants for a long, long time. I do think that, the big thing here is probably injury related. Like, he hasn't played a full season since 2019. And even in 2019, before that, it was like the 2 years before that, he was not playing a full season. So if he could stay healthy, I think he could be really solid. He's a career 356 on base, career 12% walk rate, like you were talking about. And remember, before the offseason, like everyone was talking about how the Blue Jays have like no left-handed bats. Well, this is a left-handed bat. So that's something that they desperately needed. They got one. I think they got a couple of them actually. I think this is one that's, pretty solid. So I think it's a totally fine move for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a bad deal at all. And I'm not going to miss watching him torment my Dodgers anymore. But, talking about from one former Giant to another former Giant, Johnny Cueto, resurfaced with the Colorado
White Sox,
with the Chicago White Sox this year, bounced back in a major way, has found the fountain of youth, and he has signed a 1-year, $8.5 million deal with the Miami Marlins that has a $10.5 million club option on that. It's a super interesting deal since we've always talked about the Marlins having a ton of starting pitching depth with their young guys. And I know we've potentially talked about a Pablo Lopez trade, but interesting to see them sign Cueto.
Yeah. I don't really think Johnny Cueto's actually like magically gotten better again, like back to his old ways, but he's not going to walk a lot of guys, and he's going to eat some innings. He's always been able to do that for the most part until his Giants tenure. But that's kind of been his calling card, and he'll provide some veteran presence for the Marlins. They got a lot of young up and coming pitchers that he'll help them some, and you never know. He'll probably put up a mid-4s ERA if I had to guess, and stick in the rotation as a veteran presence and a back end of the rotation type guy. So not too bad, but that's probably kind of the market value we've seen on those types of guys. And, he's also got a club option. So if he does, if it is the fact that he's found it again and he's really, really good again, then they can always pick up his option. So I think it's totally fine for the Marlins to do this. And it's pretty fun that the Marlins decided to, sign somebody. So
it's funny. We talk about, good contracts, bad contracts, all that stuff a good bit. Johnny Cueto being kind of a disaster for the Giants does not get brought up. He was stellar in 2016, and then after that, just didn't play a full season. He was just hurt, and that's no indictment on Johnny Cueto, nor is it on the Giants for the process. But man, he just has not been able to stay healthy. And then last year, he's finally healthy, and he and Corey Kluber were drinking out of the same fountain of youth. I think both of them just cratered their strikeout rate, but got a ton of weak contact and pitched 150, 160 innings. So I don't think it's unlikely that he does that again, but I don't think that he can't do it again. At the very least, having that veteran presence in the rotation with Sandy Alcantara, maybe Pablo Lopez, depends on if they trade him, Trevor Rogers, all those guys. I think the Marlins can only benefit from this, but they're still really far away given the presence of the strong teams in the NL East.
Yeah, I wish I remembered all of this stuff, but I don't. But Jolly Olive has a great video on YouTube about Johnny Cueto. I believe it was right after he signed. He went through the 2022 season, or really the career of Cueto. I very highly recommend going to watch that. It's, I think, 10 or 12 minutes. He breaks down a lot of what happened with Cueto, what Cueto did very well in 2022, and what you can kind of look forward to that into 2023. But he's one of those quirky pitchers who's always kind of a joy to watch because you never know what he's going to give you. If he's going to give you a shimmy, if he's going to give you a quick pitch, the hitters hate him. So it'll be fun to watch that scenario, but not much value on the field, numbers wise, wouldn't think from Cueto, but the Marlins also made a trade this week with the Los Angeles Dodgers. They traded away Miguel Rojas, bringing Rojas back to the Dodgers where he started his career, and acquiring infield prospect Jacob Amaya. Basically, the short story on Jacob Amaya is you hope he turns into a Miguel Rojas. He is a glove first potential shortstop, middle infielder, has good contact rates, has struggled when he jumps to a new level at striking out, but usually gets that in order. Walks a decent bit, but he's not going to have much power. He's really just going to be one of those kind of glove first type contact guys that you would hope would have a career like Miguel Rojas.
Yeah, I've always liked Miguel Rojas as a player. He's been pretty solid for the Marlins. I mean, he's been a good defensive player and a solid role player for them. A little bit below league average with the bat, but he's really, really good with the glove. And I think, like you say, I mean, you're just kind of replacing Miguel Rojas with Miguel Rojas for 6 years. In a guy who's going to come up and probably end up in a similar manner. The one thing that I do think is going to kind of suck for the Marlins, he was kind of their heart and soul player for them. That he'd been there a long time. He'd been there since 2015. He was on the Stanton, Yelich, Ozuna, Gordon team in 2015. So he's been there a long time, and I wonder what that's going to do because he was a huge clubhouse guy for them. So it'll be interesting to see what that does with the Marlins. But yeah, I mean, it's a totally fine move for them. I mean, they got a guy who's real similar. He's just gonna, he's controllable. So.
Yeah, and one thing to mention with Rojas, they're getting a new manager, new regime in there, so it's going to kind of that changing of the guard there. But basically, Rojas is going to feel probably a utility role for LA. Don't think he'll end up being the starting shortstop. I still think they're going to go with Gavin Lux for that. But the Dodgers did make another move official this week. I know we mentioned it at the end of last episode, but they officially did DFA Trevor Bauer this week. Through all his legal issues, he was reinstated onto their 40-man roster, or they had to make the decision this last week, and they ended up DFAing him and then subsequently releasing him. So he's a free agent. He can be signed anywhere for $720,000 as well. I know we don't have a lot of time to jump into all the backing behind that. Do you guys have anything?
I mean, I think a lot of people are talking about where's he going to sign, and I just don't think he's going to get as much interest as people are thinking. I mean, this is a guy who
No.
hasn't pitched in 2 years. He really fell off after the sticky stuff ban when he did pitch in 2021 too, which was kind of something that had been speculated a lot with him. And we'll see we'll see what he ends up what he ends up doing. I think if he does sign with somebody, which I think he probably gets another shot in the big leagues at some point, but I think if he does sign with somebody, it will be for a very cheap deal with a non-contender who's just going to take a chance on him and see if they can rebuild some value there. But I know he's been working on his on pitching and Driveline and stuff. He posts it all over the internet, so I know he's been, it's not like he's just been sitting on his couch for 2 years, but and he wants to get back. But I don't think the market's where I keep seeing people on social media saying, "Oh, we need to sign Trevor Bauer. We need to sign Trevor Bauer," and I just don't really see teams taking on that PR hit for a guy who you don't even know if he's going to be good when he's pitching again. So,
But the PR hit, and there's been some clubhouse stuff with Bauer too, where he's not particularly easy to work with in the clubhouse. So, ultimately I'll wait and provide more input when he signs. Yeah. For now, I think I'm with Matt. I don't know that the interest will be there, at least until spring training starts and some injuries take place.
Yeah. So we'll jump over to the San Diego Padres. They made a slew of probably a little lower moves, but they did sign Adam Engel to a 1-year deal. They signed Craig Stammen to a minor league deal, and probably the biggest of the moves is that they signed Nelson Cruz to a 1-year, $1 million deal.
I love Nelson Cruz, man. I hope he plays till he's 50. It's nice to have a 40-plus player still hanging out, even though Nelson Cruz was just terrible last year. He did manage to mash up until 2021. So, he's still got probably a little something left in the tank, but I don't think the Padres is going to be where he proves it. I think Nelson Cruz is kind of ring chasing at this point. So Padres is certainly a good way to go. Hopefully he sticks in the roster all year, helps him out a little bit, probably off the bench and in that DH spot, and then, gets to make a playoff run.
Yeah, I agree. I like Nelson Cruz. I do think one thing is hilarious in the fact that Nelson Cruz is this guy that everyone loves so much, yet he's a guy who's been suspended for steroids, and most people who have been suspended for steroids are pretty well hated. Him and Bartolo Colon are kind of two that are like, and I think a lot of it's just because
David Ortiz. I guess he wasn't.
Well, he was suspended. Like a lot of these guys were suspended. These two were actually suspended for steroids. So. But yeah, it's interesting that that's the case. But yeah, I mean, he was bad with Washington last year. I mean, I don't know if I think his age just finally started to show. Really, 2021, his age started to show down the stretch too. He's an interesting player. Y'all were talking about Hall of Fame cases. I do not think he has a shot at it, but it will be very interesting if somehow he played 2 more years and got to 500 home runs to see what the voters thought of him, because that is somewhat possible. I don't think he finds 2 more years of playing time, but who knows? Maybe if he hit 20 home runs this year, then he might get another shot for somebody just chasing after that milestone. But yeah, it's interesting, and you never know. I mean, we would have said the same thing last year about Albert Pujols, and then he came in and was actually like a really good player last year. So you never know. But the other guys they signed, I actually kind of like the Adam Engel deal. I think that he is a guy who's a really good defender in the outfield, and in 2021 he only played 39 games, but he had a 125 WRC plus in those games, and in 2020 he had a 120 WRC plus in 36 games. So it's a guy who has shown for a third of a season, or sorry, a fifth of a season, like he's shown just some flashes of maybe not being horrible at the plate, and he's a good defender. So like, I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting flyer to take. And Craig Stammen's a guy who's just been around a long time. He's a veteran reliever. You just never know about those types of guys.
Adam Engel is Tim Locastro. If Tim Locastro could play a good defensive outfield. So Yeah, Adam Engel's not a good hitter, and
No.
he won't be a good hitter. But he will provide good fourth, fifth defensive outfielder for the Padres next year.
And let me clarify. When I say good hitter, I don't mean like he's going to be a good hitter. I mean like on a scale of a 40 WRC plus hitter, like Christian Pache level hitter, to a scale of like maybe he's just a little bit below league average hitter. That's what I'm talking about. As like maybe he's not such a disaster with the bat that he never like you can't play him. So
not quite. He's not quite Billy Hamilton bad, but he's
right.
not
You
good.
watch your mouth.
At the
watch
plate,
your mouth.
Billy is a god.
He's a saint. Staying in the NL West, and the Giants signed reliever Luke Jackson to a 2-year, $11.5 million deal. There is a third-year option that is worth $7 million. I believe it's a vesting, but could be a team option. I'm not quite sure on that. But Matt, you know Luke Jackson very well because he was a former Brave.
Well, let me preface this because I'm not going to like this deal, but let me preface this by saying I absolutely love Luke Jackson. He's one of my favorite Braves in the last several years. I think he was criminally underrated for parts of his tenure in Atlanta, where people just absolutely seem to rag on him constantly. But when he was actually like really pretty good. But you're giving a guy, you're not giving him a ton of money, but I can't believe he got a multi-year deal because this guy for 2021. His ERA was incredible, but he really didn't pitch all that well. He's wild and he only has 2 pitches, and he really can't control his slider very well. His fastball is kind of a meatball. I mean, man, I love the guy. I don't want to hate on him, but I just he's coming off of Tommy John surgery. I mean, I'm shocked that he got more than just like a minor league deal. Compared to you got guys like Nick Anderson getting minor league deals, and then they gave Luke Jackson $5 million a year for 2 years. I mean, I just can't imagine that. But I love Luke Jackson. I will say one other thing about him: he's a fantastic clubhouse guy. The clubhouse absolutely loved him in Atlanta, and I think he'll do fantastic in the clubhouse in San Francisco as well. I think he'll be very well liked there. It's just, man, as a player, like, I just don't see why you would give him a multi-year deal, and for that much, for not like for real, somewhat real money,
Maybe they got tied up in the 1.98 ERA last year. That's what I would see. And ERA obviously isn't everything, but you still do have to have some stuff to be able to put up said 1.98 ERA. So I see where the Giants are coming from here, trying to kind of capitalize on maybe the lower value, or maybe even reduce the single year where he might have gone like 1 year, $8 million. They'd rather have him at 2 years for $11 million, something to that effect. He's only 30 years old, so, or I guess he's only 31 years old, coming off an injury, but certainly upside there. Giants are pretty good about pulling the most out of their pitchers, so I could see Luke Jackson kind of being solid in the bullpen for the Giants.
The thing is Alex Anthopoulos and Farhan Zaidi were in the same front office, so he's probably getting good intel there when they were with LA. His base salary, I know the luxury tax salary is going to look at $5.75 million, but his base salary this year is only $3 million. You typically see this with relievers who are coming off injuries from the year before. They get a multi-year deal with a low salary in the first year that I don't know if they're going to be guaranteed to pitch or just not pitch the level that a normal one would. But if you're going into a off season, through this year for a decent reliever arm, then his salary would be 1 year, $6.5 million. I mean, that's not a bad deal. I mean, or Chris Martin got $8 million this year.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you have an option for $7 million for the next year. I don't hate the deal. Like, you're getting him on the cheap 1 year deal there. The $6.5 million next year is about market value, probably even a little less for right now for a decent reliever. And then you have just about that same value on an option deal as well. So you give yourself 3 potential years for under, league value for a decent bullpen arm. I think it's a typical Farhan Zaidi move. I mean, it really is. So I don't hate that deal at all. But I am going to hate it when he does pretty good against the Dodgers, because that's annoying.
It's coming.
It's absolutely coming. But Talking about the Dodgers, let's go to a former Dodger signing with the Seattle Mariners and AJ Pollock signing a 1-year, $7 million deal to probably fill that Teoscar Hernandez role. Or not Teoscar, to fill it, to help him be a part of that left-handed killing team. I don't know what I'm saying. Guys, take it away.
He's handling the Mitch Haniger role.
There you go. That's what I was looking for.
That's the one.
That's what I meant. Matt, why'd you say Teoscar Hernandez?
I didn't.
You did. We'll play it back.
But yeah, I think this is a guy who's been at times a really good player. Can somewhat still handle the outfield, but probably more of a DH now. He's had so many injuries in his career. I mean, if you can put up 100 games, 120 games, and give you a little bit above league average bat, he's always had a pretty good bat. I think that would probably be a successful outcome here. It's a 1-year deal, $7 million, and if you could get him to be a fourth outfielder who can hit some, maybe DH some, I think that's totally fine for him. So, $7 million isn't too bad for that. And a guy with some upside. I mean, in 2021, he only played 117 games, but it was a 137 WRC plus. So, like he has pretty recently been a very good hitter. It's just a matter of can he rebound? Because 2022 was a disaster.
So currently I'm looking at the depth charts for the Mariners. Their outfield consists of Julio in center, and he should play every day.
Yeah.
Jared Kelenic is currently slotted in left. Pollock's at DH. Teoscar's in right, which I wouldn't do that. That's just this thing. Then they've got Dylan Moore and Sam Haggerty and Taylor Trammell. So Trammell's a lefty. In Kelenick's lefty. I do believe that they're looking to kind of platoon Pollock in with Kelenic and Trammell and they'll just manipulate the lineup a little bit, try to get those lefties in and the righties in as needed. This is fine. Honestly, I don't like this deal all that much because I think the Mariners have a playoff roster, and I think they needed to be more in on Trey Mancini. I'm certainly glad they weren't, but Mancini fits this a lot better than Pollock does in my mind, and I think the Mariners made a mistake here. I think there was some better options for them, and Pollock doesn't really fit for me.
Yeah, I do think that the one thing is they probably did want someone who's still capable of playing the outfield to some level, so that's probably why they went with Pollock over Mancini.
Well, that and Pollock crushes lefties compared to Mancini, who has not been very good against
neutral.
Lefties. Yeah. Where Pollock was, I think, 230 against righties this year and 280 against lefties. I really like this deal. I mean, 1 year, $7 million Pollock. And from watching Pollock, when he gets hot, he can carry an offense for a week or two at a time. Like, he's a really good player, a really good clubhouse guy. Matt said he could still play the field decently well. And a big time lefty crusher if that's what they're looking to get with, platooning with Kelenic and Trammell. So I do really like this deal. He's a winning player, and he's been pretty decent in the playoffs as well. But our last move that we have actually, player wise, the Oakland A's sign right-handed pitcher Shintaro Fujimani. Sorry if I butchered that. But for a 1 year, $3.25 million deal, he's coming over from, I believe, the Hinshaw Tigers. I could be wrong on that, but he's expected to go into their rotation per multiple different reports.
I have no idea anything about him. I couldn't find him on Fangraphs, so.
Yeah. From everything I've seen, he wants to be called Fuji, like the mountain. So he seems like a great guy already. I already love him. I think he'll be off the A's by June if he pitches well.
Probably.
I have only bad things to say about the Oakland A's management system at this point. So this poor dude, hopefully he doesn't get just absolutely shelled.
Yeah.
Supposedly he is 6'6", 180, which is like the skinniest human being I've ever heard of.
What a wiry man.
Yeah, and he's thrown 100 before and has great off speed. That's according to MLB.com, which is probably just hyping him up a little bit too. But his stuff is probably good. It looks like he had a very high whip with the so he probably has control problems, if I had to guess. 400, in fact, across 994 innings. This is in the Japanese league with Hanshin. 459 walks in 94 innings. So
That'll play.
high walk guy. Does strike out a bit, a pretty good amount of guys, but that's kind of him. He's got good stuff, but he walks a lot of guys, and he's a veteran. So that's a really interesting profile. It's not the typical profile you see from Japanese pitcher coming over.
Well, it's not the typical body you see from a Japanese pitcher either, you know?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's like a Shohei Ohtani type like size,
right.
you know. Except like not 180, but more like Shohei Ohtani's.
Yeah, Ohtani's a huge dude. Anyway.
Yeah, yes.
So it'll be interesting to see what he looks like. I'll actually tune into an Oakland A's game, one of them, just to see him.
Don't they play the Cubs in spring training?
Everyone plays everybody.
I'll go find. Yeah,
everyone plays everybody this year. So.
In spring training?
No, in regular season.
No. That's what I'm saying. In spring training, the Cubs and the A's, I think, share a facility where they play a ton in spring. I'll get a chance to see him early on. So
at some point. So a couple off the field notes that we want to hit on. One of them is more minor than the other, but the first one is Don Mattingly, who is the new bench coach for the Toronto Blue Jays, is joining the Nashville Stars, which is, I believe, the minor league team there.
Yeah,
if I could believe. To provide counsel, per the article, to provide counsel in key strategic matters and help work to gain the support for a new expansion franchise in Nashville. It's something we've talked about a lot recently. MLB is wanting to expand here in the next few years. Nashville is one of the hotbeds. It's one of the higher ranked places on the list to get one. We've heard a lot of support from there, and now they're getting a former major league manager and player to join in on that.
So I'm just to correct what I said a minute ago. The Nashville Sounds is the AAA baseball team there. The Nashville Stars is actually a local management group trying to bring an MLB franchise. It makes sense. Yeah. But anyways, it'll be interesting to see if Nashville lands a franchise. It almost would, with the way that Nashville is part of the Atlanta market for baseball, it feels like you might have a little bit of a LA Chargers Rams kind of dynamic there, because there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of Cubs fans in Nashville too, a lot of Cardinals fans in Nashville. A lot of people are kind of set on what team they're pulling for there. So you might end up with one of those dynamics where there's a big Rams Chargers dynamic in LA, with the NFL having moved there, where like anytime a visiting team goes to LA, like the Raiders or the 49ers, like it's just packed out with a visiting team. I mean, that's kind of how a Nashville MLB team might feel to me. But and I might just be saying that because I'm a Braves fan or whatever, but
yeah,
but still, like, it feels like that would be tough to start a franchise in that part of the country. But yeah, Nashville's a great market for it though. So
I can only completely disagree so much here. I completely disagree, dude. Nashville, and I lived in Nashville, so I at least have a little bit of room to talk here.
Yeah,
Nashville Sound Stadium is fantastic. It is.
Oh yeah.
It is downtown. It's a great location. The issue is going to be they will not be able to renovate that stadium into a major league stadium.
No, they have to build a stadium.
It's only 10,000. They have to build a stadium. Where they build that stadium is going to tell you everything you need to know about whether Nashville is going to support the stadium or not. There's room around Nashville to build a stadium where it's pretty accessible and wouldn't destroy the traffic, but Nashville traffic's already horrific in downtown. So they're probably going to build it far away from downtown. And in that case, I think you're going to see not as many people supporting it because no one wants to get into the Nashville traffic to go to the stadium. So you have to be on the lookout for where this gets built. But if Nashville does manage to put that stadium downtown around kind of the Predator Stadium, that maybe even using, I think the Titans are actually moving stadiums.
A new stadium. They
so if they use that plot of land for the Nashville, baseball team stadium, it's in a perfect location.
Yeah.
Right. That's perfect. Right. But
literally,
if you're not going to do that, if you're going to send it out into the suburbs, right, into Franklin or something, that is going to be a major mistake. I love Nashville as a baseball town, and Nashville as a sports town. They support their teams extremely
Big
well.
Time.
The Predators have one of the most raucous fan bases in NHL, and I hate it because I hate the Predators. But it's like they are really, really supportive of that team there. So, if you can get the city actually, get that baseball team located in the city with everybody there, near Broadway, near all the stuff. I genuinely think Nashville packs out a stadium every night. They'll, it'll be a destination stadium as long as they can, make sure they don't make that mistake of going way out into the suburbs where it's more of a, country Tennessee stadium, in which case you'll see, not very many people showing up to it.
Come on now, the Franklin Firecrackers are going to draw great crowds.
I'm on the side with David here because Nashville's becoming a hotbed of a city around the nation. Like a bunch of people are wanting to move to Nashville or around the Nashville area. It's becoming very, very popular. It gets a lot of support from its fans, like you mentioned. It has a lot of, you get a lot of celebrity support from it because, that's basically where country music and everything is. Like those people, you do get a lot of support from people, from celebrities in Nashville. And when looking at it, I'd rather have, I was reading an article about this and they want one of the teams to be out west, which they're looking at Portland, but they wanted one in that kind of southeast region. They were looking at the Carolinas or Nashville. Like, I think you'd rather have the team in Nashville because I think Carolinas is more of a Braves country.
Yeah.
Than Nashville. And I don't know if you're going to put a third team in Florida. It just doesn't make sense there.
No.
The Rays are already struggling. The Marlins already struggle. Yeah. Like if you're going to put a team, I feel like Nashville is the one place that you're going to put in that region to really gain a fan base. It's the perfect sports town for that scenario. So
we should note that the talk of expansion is great for the sport. It's sorely needed because we've been in this kind of stagnant a bit for a while. The last time it expanded was the Rockies and the Diamondbacks. I'm thrilled that they're finally talking about expanding. The way it looks right now is that they'll put one in either Nashville or maybe Raleigh, are the two that I've seen.
Yeah, that's what I was reading.
And then they'll put one in Portland potentially, and get one up near Seattle. Get Seattle kind of a natural rival, which will be nice for them, and another West Coast team there.
And it is Portland, considering that Oakland's move to Vegas becomes official.
Right.
If it doesn't become official, then the expansion team is 100% going to Vegas.
Yeah.
But I also think it's possible the Rays team moves to Raleigh, and then you have, kind of a threesome there, but maybe not.
We'll see. The Rays, haven't they?
They could also move to Montreal.
They're signed through 2030, aren't
I was
they?
Gonna say, and I'm pretty sure the Rays have there's been pretty deep talks on an actual ballpark happening there.
Yeah, there has been.
And actually in Tampa and not in St. Petersburg. That's the biggest issue for the Rays. Like you were talking about with Nashville being in, trying to move into the suburbs. Like it's way worse in Tampa having to have the stadium in St. Petersburg, which is across the bay. There's not even a second way into that. It's tough. So
yeah,
right,
absolutely. Well, the last big article that piece of news that we want to hit on is the robot umps are getting closer to the major leagues. They are going to be implemented in all 30 AAA ballparks this year. There's going to be two different styles out of it, and I pulled this directly from the column that Buster Only put on ESPN. It says the automatic balls and strike system, commonly referred to as ABS, will be deployed in two different ways. Half of the Class AAA games will be played with all of the calls determined by electronic strike zone, and the other half will be played by an ABS challenge system similar to what you see in professional tennis. Each team will be allowed 3 challenges per game, while teams retaining challenges in cases they are proved correct. MLB's intention is to use the form to collect data and feedback for both systems over the full slate of games to inform of future choices. And as of right now, they don't have a direct set timeline for it to be implemented into the major leagues.
I have a major opinion on this, and it's that the challenge system is perfect for Major League Baseball going forward. Major League umps are getting better. We're seeing the bad umps get called out and have to fix their game, and they're retiring because they're bad. And good umpires are getting recognized finally for having good games. And all we need is the challenge system to clean up those couple of maybe impactful missed calls that are not necessarily the umpire's fault, but just so that you have that margin of error so that the game can be properly called. I think that's absolutely just the right move here. I don't think automatic balls and strikes is necessarily the play because we have umpires now that are good enough to call a perfect game.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that, like, I think that sometimes some balls and strikes that will be called balls and strikes are totally, like, unhittable type things where it's not, you almost have to adjust the strike zone to a certain level if you're going to have a robo ump, because you might have something that's like typically umpires are not going to give you the millimeter up and in on the very corner and the millimeter down and away on the very corner, because that's just almost impossible for a guy to hit, so I think that challenge system is a way that could be that could really help. That they could still have that little bit of a advantage to the hitter type thing, but if there's like an egregiously bad call or something, then they can go back and do that type of challenge, kind of like how in tennis they have like the the virtual thing. I like that, so I think that's a great idea, David. I really like that.
We've seen it in play too. There's a clip of it on circling around Twitter where the pitch, I think it's Jason Dominguez gets a strike or gets a ball, or he gets a called strike. He points at the ump and he's like, I want to challenge that. They flip the camera to the big screen. The ball, they show the track come across and it says it's a ball. And the ump calls it a ball. They switch the count and they move on. It takes all of 10 seconds. It's really the perfect way to do things because it doesn't take away from the flow of the game where you could still have the arguments regarding those automatic balls and strikes, and the ump's going to say like, well, the ump robot called it, not me, and there's not going to be anywhere to argue. But if there's a challenge, you'll flash it up. That'll be the call, and that's it. I just love that. I think it's the right direction for baseball.
And I think it's going to be the way players want. I mean, listening to players talk about, this potential automatic strike zone, all of them say the game shouldn't be perfect. Like they like the human element of having the umpire. It just needs to be more consistent. David, you brought up a good point. We've seen a lot of the older umpires start retiring. I think we've had 12 step away this year, this offseason or something like that. Like, and some big name umpires who, will be known throughout the baseball world, are stepping away, and it's perfect. Like Matt mentioned, could you imagine the video board doing that and the entire 50,000 people in the crowd watching the track of the ball come in, and then it's just like strike, and they're like, oh, or it shows like ball, and they're like, yeah, like, dude, that'd be so fun to watch as well. But that absolutely should be the way. Like the human element is still needed in the game. It's not a game that should be about perfection. And it just really is the right thing. I mean, and the 3 challenges, and you get to keep them if you, if you're successful. You'll probably see that number fluctuate if they do any, collective bargaining. Players are going to want more, umpires are going to want less. So you'll see. I mean, if you have 3 for the entire game, maybe you might want to bump that to 5 just because we do. Who knows? But anyways, I hope that's the way that it goes, is the challenge system over the fully robotic system. So
I hope that it isn't. I just don't want that many, right? I don't want it to need to be used that much. You just need to use it in those instances where it's like a clear ball, ump sees it as a strike, player doesn't want to be struck out on that to end the inning with runners on, right? Those are the impactful ones, and you don't want to, miss those. Oftentimes you'll see the ump scorecard, and it's like the worst call is like a 0-0 count in the first inning, right? And the ump just missed it a little bit off the corner because he's getting the game going. That's not going to get challenged. So, we just we'll see how it goes, and I think they'll make the right call here. I'm confident.
I can't wait to see what that would look like in postseason baseball. Could you imagine that? But anyways, I know we're running a little bit long, but any last things you guys want to wrap up on?
I mean, I think that we've got, I was looking at the list of free agents that are left, and it's like, I mean, Trevor Bauer is one that is going to be high profile, but I don't really even know if he's going to have interest. And then other than that, we're pretty much done. I mean, there's a few guys who are maybe a couple of relievers who are somewhat interesting still that are out there. I know that, like, I guess, like, maybe Zach Britton, still interesting. Corey Knable's maybe a little bit interesting. I mean, you have a couple of, like, more minor pieces, like or Jerkson Profile is definitely still an interesting guy, but
Gary
Sanchez, Adam Duvall. I mean, most of these guys that are left are kind of like platoon bats or fourth outfielders or, back of the rotation guys. No, there's no more free agents left after Correa that are of real consequence at this stage. Like, they could end up being great this year. Don't get me wrong, but like right now they're not. There's nobody out there that I'm like, you're gonna, be like super excited over. So definitely interesting to see what happens the rest of the offseason. I think probably in our next few episodes we'll probably start to kind of, maybe we'll do a Hall of Fame episode, and then we'll kind of turn our attention toward, like, maybe breaking down some of the divisions for next year. If y'all are interested in that in our next, maybe our next couple episodes soon. So getting close to spring training. So in fact, if we're doing this every 2 weeks, like, I think we got 2 more episodes before spring training. So
yeah, because we would have the 31st and then the 14th, and I think the 15th is right around when pitchers and catchers are supposed to be reporting. So I have about 2 more episodes before that's officially baseball time.
Yep.
So it's pretty exciting. Pretty exciting. But thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast, and we will catch you guys in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everybody.